حبيبنا وشفيعنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. اللهم علمنا بما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا يا رب العالمين. أما بعد. Again, to the organizers, thank you for having me here. It's always a pleasure to work with Suhbah and the people involved. I know some of you, and even in the crowd today, some familiar faces, but it's actually nice to see that I actually don't know most of you, or at least I may have seen you before, but you know, it's nice to see fresh new faces, and it just shows that the community is growing, the community is becoming more diverse, and with that growth, there's more of a need for different types of programs than what a lot of us were used to growing up. Today's topic, which is basically on marriage and righteous companions, right? It's not something that I personally speak about often, although when it comes to talking about marriage, a lot of it is very anecdotal, and that makes sense because it should come from personal experience. And I'm no marriage expert, right? That's my sister's job. She's a family and marital therapist, so I usually try to plug her in whenever I talk about marriage, because then it's like, if you really need professional help, there's therapy for that. So, and in a good way. It's not so much that, oh, if when somebody suggests therapy or need therapy, like, people view it as taboo, and suddenly it's like, oh, something's wrong with me, or something's wrong with us, or something's wrong with our marriage. That's not always the case. Sometimes you can just do it just to better know yourself. Maybe there's some aspects of your personality or your character or just the way your mind works that you're unaware of, and it requires someone with expertise to kind of point it out to you. And again, it's not to say that there's something wrong with you or something wrong with your relationship, but it's just to maybe better be able to identify certain things that maybe before was burdening you, or was holding you back from just basically being the best version of yourself, right? And then you can learn how to cope and how to figure things out, and live your life the way you'd like to. And so yeah, therapy is not, it's not some bad word that people throw at you. Um, I myself, it's funny because what's today, the 16th, right? So I've been married for exactly 1 month and 15 years. Right? So
You started off with 1 month.
yeah, I know, because I was like, hey, it's February 16th. So my nikah anniversary was last month, exactly 15 years, right? So January 16th, 2010 was when I got married.
He's pretty young though, mashallah. So don't let that scare you.
No, and yeah, of course, look, marriage, it comes with its ups and downs. Suddenly, you're responsible for someone other than yourself. Some people are used to it. Maybe they're the oldest sibling and they're used to taking care of all the other siblings, or maybe they're an only sibling, right? Sorry, only child, and they have to take on their own set of responsibilities. Yeah, it just depends on your household, how you grew up, how you were raised, right? I'm a middle child, for whatever that's worth, right? Sometimes they're called the forgotten child. Sometimes, they're always the most troublesome, right? The most rebellious, or what have you. Um, yeah, so it's always good to look at the examples that we have available to us. So it's nice that tonight's topic touches on the marriages of righteous couples, right? And when we want to look at the best of examples, there's the examples of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam with his wives. There's examples of other prophets with their wives, and of course we have the best of mankind after the prophets, which are the companions. And we have many examples from that, because we only know of so many prophets and their relationships with their wives, but we have thousands upon thousands of companions whose lives are pretty well documented. And subhanallah, it's interesting that when you think about couples from the companions and the famous stories that we get from them, most of them are from people that are from the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Either from his daughters, which we'll touch upon, or from one of his wives before they were married to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or even some of his closest companions, right? So we find examples in all of these. And the first, when we talk about marriage, people always look to the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ and Khadija, right? So this is something that I'm sure people have heard many times before. She was his rock. She was his emotional support. She was the love of his life. She was his one and only wife that he was married to. He was not married to anyone else while he was married to Khadija. She bore him all of his children except for Ibrahim alayhi salam, who died in infancy, but that was towards the end of the Prophet's life. She suffered through everything that the Prophet ﷺ suffered through during his time in Mecca. So she saw all of the hardship, all of the mostly downs, right? There weren't very many ups except for the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure during their time in Mecca. And they suffered through the boycott, and that caused her to become weak and frail and to eventually pass away, right? And she was the one that the Prophet ﷺ would always, he would always be excited at any memory of her, right? So for instance, when her sister would be around, he would get excited and he would hope that it was her, because Khadija radiallahu anha, her sister, Hala was somebody that resembled her a lot, right? Not just in appearance, but her voice and her mannerisms. So the Prophet ﷺ would get excited because it would remind him of, she would remind him of Khadija radiallahu anha. So he would always, be kind to her sister, to Khadija's sister, and to, honor her, to treat her nicely. You get her gifts from time to time and whatnot, just from his loving memory of his wife, right? And then we know about the marriage of Aisha and the Prophet ﷺ. She was the most beloved wife to him after Khadija, but the Prophet ﷺ loved Khadija so much that Aisha radiallahu anha was jealous of Khadija, right? Even though she wasn't around, but she knew, right? She knew, and how much the Prophet ﷺ loved Khadija, that it even made her jealous, right? So she was jealous of somebody that wasn't even around, that was, a lot. Aisha radiallahu anha was, either she didn't exist or she was very, very young during the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ with Khadija, right? But as I mentioned, these are all stories we've heard time and time again. Whereas some of the companions, we don't hear about their marriages too often. Most famously, we do hear about the relationship and marriage of Ali radiallahu anh and Fatima radiallahu anha. Right, so we'll go over that a little bit, and then we'll go into a couple of other relationships and maybe some examples from other companions as well. And then, of course, when it comes to topics like these, it's usually Q&A that takes up a lot of time. And I don't mind doing Q&A, as long as I may or may not know the answer. I'll let you know if I don't know. And you guys can maybe bug another person about it. Maybe Mahad and Sophia. You guys can bug them about it, inshallah. So when it comes to the marriage of Ali and Fatima radiallahu anhuma, it was one of those famous marriages because, number one, Fatima, she was, and this is no secret, she was the most beloved child of the Prophet ﷺ. You know how parents will always say, like, oh, I don't have a favorite. Fatima was the favorite, right? Without a doubt. He loved her more than anyone else from his entire family, right? From his blood relatives, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved Fatima the most, right? So much so that she had certain nicknames only for her. So she was Al Habiba bint Al Habib, right? The beloved female daughter of the beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And she was also called Abiha, right? Because to give some background, Fatima radiallahu anha, she was born around the time the Prophet ﷺ received revelation and became a prophet. Right? So it was already a very special time. There's a difference of opinion when she was born. Some say 5 years prior to revelation, some say 5 years after, and some say during like the moment Khadija radiallahu anha was pregnant with Fatima when the Prophet ﷺ had received revelation. So she was born later that year. So let's just go with she was born during the time of revelation, when the Prophet ﷺ received revelation. And she was the only daughter out of her 4 sisters. So we know the Prophet ﷺ from Khadija had how many children? 6. Who was the first? First child. What was the Prophet ﷺ's nickname? His kunya. What was he called by? Abul Qasim. Right? Normally, you're father of your firstborn, right? So I would be Abu Ibrahim. Right? So Abu Qasim. So his first child was Al Qasim, who and his sons they died at early age. Some died in infancy, and it was mentioned that one of his sons died like at the age of 3. Right? So of course this was very tough on the Prophet ﷺ, but he understood that this was the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then after that, his first daughter was the first daughter? Zainab, who we'll be speaking about after. And then Ruqayya, and then Kulthum, and then Fatima, radiallahu anha, right? So she was the last daughter, because after that, some scholars, they're not sure whether Abdullah alayhi salam, the other son of the Prophet sallam, died in infancy or was stillborn or what, but some don't even think that he existed at all. So he was another son, but died very, very, very early after Fatima. So Fatima was basically the last child, and she took care of the Prophet ﷺ whenever he was being abused or he was hurt or anything like that, right? Because Khadija radiallahu anha, she was the one to comfort the Prophet ﷺ emotionally. And then Fatima radiallahu anha, she learned this from her mother, and she was very attached to her father, and she took a lot after her father. Right? So you have those examples of when the Prophet ﷺ would be bruised and bloodied, right? It was said that Fatima radiallahu anha would be the one to tend to his wounds, right? She would clean him up and treat his wounds. And there's the famous story of when Abu Jahl told one of the other leaders of the Quraysh, his name was Utbah, I think. And he told him, I'm sure you've heard the story where one of the leaders of the Quraysh took the innards of a camel and threw them onto the Prophet ﷺ as he was praying. Right? So when he went into sujood, then he took the intestines, everything, right? Whatever it was, he took all of it and he just threw it on the Prophet ﷺ. So it wasn't just that the intestines and everything else, all the innards were on him, but the weight of it actually was too much for him to bear, and he was like collapsing on the floor basically. So then Abdullah bin Mas'ud, he ran to the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and he told whoever was at home, what's going on, and he found Fatima there. So then Fatima came, and she was in tears, right, seeing her father in this state. She would see him come home like this, but she actually saw like this was the peak of humiliation that the Prophet ﷺ faced from the Quraysh. So as she was scraping off the entrails and the intestines and everything, she was just crying profusely. And that was kind of the last straw for the Prophet ﷺ. He was upset not because they threw the intestines on him. He was upset because it caused his daughter to grieve so much. So this was one of the very few times that the Prophet ﷺ actually made dua against someone, right? So Fatima was crying, and then the Prophet ﷺ tried to comfort her. And then when she wouldn't stop crying, he raised his hands and he made dua against Abu Jahl and Utbah, right? And this actually freaked out Abu Jahl because he knew that the Prophet ﷺ, if he were to make dua, it would probably come true, right? And this is the enemy of Islam, but even he knew that the dua would come true, right? But this was how much the Prophet ﷺ loved Fatima, and this was how much Fatima loved the Prophet ﷺ. And then, of course, we have Ali radiallahu an, who the Prophet ﷺ raised himself, right? He took Ali from his uncle Abu Talib in order to help out his uncle, right? This was a whole tribal system. Life was very different back then. It was normal for other relatives to help out and to raise the children of their other relatives, right? So the Prophet ﷺ and his uncle Al-Abbas, they went to Abu Talib. They agreed that we're going to help out Abu Talib because Abu Talib was going through some difficulty. Let's just go and we'll take a child each and help raise them in order to help out Abu Talib. So Prophet ﷺ, he took Ali radiallahu an, and Al-Abbas took Ja'far. Right? Abu Talib had 3 sons. The oldest was Aqil, and then you had Ja'far, and then you had Ali radiallahu an. So he raised Ali in his own household. And it's actually a miracle, right? This is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he wasn't nursed by Khadija, right? He lived in their household. Khadija was having children and she was nursing them. And it was normal for a mother who was producing milk to feed any of the children in their household, right? So it was actually a blessing in disguise that she never nursed Ali, because had she done that, what would have happened? Exactly. Ali would have become what they call a milk son, right? That's a weird term, but it just sounds a lot better in Arabic, right? But he'll become the son of the Prophet ﷺ and a brother to all of his children. So Fatima and Ali, they wouldn't have been able to marry each other had Khadija nursed him, but she never did. And you can see, like, this was Allah's plan. So Ali is, depending on which date you take for Fatima's birth, Ali was born around when the Prophet ﷺ was about 30 years old, right? So Ali and the Prophet's daughter Zainab are around the same age. So Ali is possibly 5 to 10 years older than Fatima. So they all migrate to Medina, and the Prophet ﷺ, he's built his home. Ali's now an adult, right? By the time they go to Medina, he's about in his early 20s. And he's no longer living with the Prophet ﷺ. He's on his own. And Fatima, by the time the Battle of Badr is over, right? Fatima is also in her late teens. And back in that day, and subhanAllah, this is crazy. When I was looking into a lot of these marriages, right, it was normal for people back then to be married in their early teens, right? So because of course, look, back then, if you for a girl, once you start your menstruation, you're considered an adult. And for boys, it's either you show signs of puberty or you hit the age of 15, right? So maturity was a lot earlier, right? When I say maturity, that means everything. Like, you're mentally mature, you're more responsible. You have to figure out life on your own at that point, right? So Fatima not being married into her late teens and Ali still not being married was actually more of an exception than the norm, right? So after the Battle of Badr, you had companions proposing for the hand of Fatima, right? You had different companions coming to the Prophet ﷺ, because it was like, if you think about it, Fatima was described as being basically like the female version of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? She had a lot of the same um, like features of the Prophet, where her face, they said her face would shine bright just like the Prophet's. The way she would sit, the way she would stand, her mannerisms, her the way she would worship Allah, it was as if it was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, right? So, and they knew how much the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved her, so they essentially wanted to marry the most beloved child of the Prophet ﷺ, so that they could receive that love as well. So you had companions like Abu Bakr and Umar and other companions coming to ask for the hand of Fatima radiallahu anha in marriage, and he said no to them. Ali was also interested, but when he saw that the Prophet ﷺ said no to Abu Bakr and Umar, he was like, "Oh shoot, I don't have a chance." Right? He was like, "There's no way the Prophet ﷺ is going to say yes to me when he said no to Abu Bakr and Umar." So when Ali was with his relatives and they were just sitting and talking, people were dropping hints to him, like, "Hey, why don't you go and propose for Fatima? Just go try it out." And he's like, over Abu Bakr and Umar, he's like, "I don't think so." And then he just kept pushing him and pushing him. And finally he's like, "Okay." So he went to the Prophet ﷺ and he sat in front of him. And then he got so nervous, right? He was muttering and stumbling and he didn't know what to say. So then the Prophet ﷺ said that, "Is everything okay? Are you all right?" And then Ali still couldn't say anything. He was like, "Yeah, everything's fine. Everything's okay." So he's like, "Okay, what business do you have?" And he couldn't say it. The words were not coming out of his mouth. So then the Prophet ﷺ was like, "Okay, are you here to ask for Fatima's hand in marriage?" And he still couldn't answer him properly. He was like, "Okay, what do you have to offer as a mahar?" Right? And this is one of the biggest lessons we take from this story. He said, "I have nothing. Like, I don't have anything. What can I give?" He's like, "Okay, what about when you go to battle? Like, do you have armor, anything?" He's like, "I have a shield." "Okay, how much is that shield worth?" "About 4 dirhams." Now, mind you, 4 dirhams is worth like $12. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ said, "Go to the market, sell your shield, and use that as the mahar." Right? So remember, the Prophet ﷺ is agreeing to 4 dirhams in principle as the mahar for Fatima. So Ali's on his way to the marketplace. Uthman radiallahu anh sees Ali. And this is another beautiful aspect that we all really should truly try to incorporate as a community. But Uthman is currently the son-in-law of the Prophet ﷺ. He's married to Ruqayya, right? But also, mind you, Ruqayya had passed away at the time of the Battle of Badr. That's why Uthman didn't go and participate in the battle. She had passed away, so it was known as a victory for the Battle of Badr, but a great loss because the Prophet's daughter had passed away. So after Ruqayya had passed away, the Prophet ﷺ offered Kulthum to him. And the Prophet ﷺ had so much praise for Uthman radiallahu anh. He would say that if I had more daughters, I would marry them to Uthman, right, after Kulthum had passed away. Because whenever you study the life of Uthman radiallahu anh, you see what type of a person he is. And you'll see how he is in this story right now. He sees Ali. He goes up to him. He says, "What are you doing?" He's like, basically, he told him, "I'm trying to marry Fatima, and all I have is a shield. I'm trying to sell it so that I can get something to pay for the mahar." So then Uthman said, "Okay, sell it to me." He said, "Okay." He's like, "Are you sure? This is worth nothing." He's like, "Don't worry, sell it to me. I'll give you 400 dirhams for it." Right? Forget 4. He gave him 400. Other narrations say 480. So then he's like, "Okay, sure." He's like, Uthman's rich. This is no dent in his pocket, right? He gives him the shield. He takes the 400 dirhams. He's happy because he's like, "Okay, now I can finally, like pay for stuff for this marriage." And then Uthman comes back to him and he says, "Look, it's your wedding. Here's your gift." And he gives him back the shield, right? So this was a son-in-law of the Prophet ﷺ seeing somebody near and dear to him and to the Prophet and to the Muslims, and he helps him out, right? Nowadays, what do you see? especially like for those of you that watch all those dramas and stuff, what happens? The brother-in-law, the sister-in-law, they're always conniving and trying to find some way to sabotage the other relationships or to show themselves as better or to be, it's that whole it wouldn't be drama if it wasn't like that, right? So but Uthman, he helped his brother in need, right? And not only did he help him, but he then gave him back his shield, right, as a wedding gift. So now he comes back with 400 or 480, whichever narration you take. So then Prophet ﷺ, he asked Ali, he's like, what happened? Ali told him the whole story. So then the Prophet ﷺ praised Uthman and said that, he's a very kind and generous son-in-law and made dua for him. So then they start arranging for the wedding and whatnot. So, some, I think the Hanafis, they take this mahar and they say that this is what is recommended as a mahar, right? Basically, what is 400 dirhams? 480 dirhams. One dirham is 3 ounces of silver, right? A dirham is a silver coin, and it weighs about, not 3 ounces, 3 grams. Sorry. 1 gram of silver is worth how much today? Anybody know? No one's preparing for zakat?
Yeah.
I'm joking. It's fine. 1 gram is about $1, right? So 3 grams, $3. 400 dirhams is about 1,200 grams. So 1,200. Or if you say 480 dirhams, you can round up to $1,500 US dollars, right? Nowadays, what do you see mahar amounts?
5, 10, 15, 20.
5, 10, 15, 50. I've seen 100, 100K. I've done a nikah where the mahar was 100K. Sorry, 100,000 and $1.
Oh my
They always got to add the $1. I don't know what that's for. I think it's like a desi thing. But they got to throw in that $1. It's like, couldn't you take off the dollar instead of adding a dollar? But yeah, the mahar was 100K, right? The idea of mahar, and this is one of the main points we learned from this story. It's become kind of like you're placing a value on the bride instead of it being a wedding gift from husband to wife, right? The mahar is supposed to be a gift from the husband to the wife. It should be something that the families agree on. You can't just be like, oh, here's the gift, you have to accept it. No, like it's something they should agree on, but you also can't make it so. And I see the reasoning, because it's like you want, for any father that's giving his daughter, you want her to be taken care of no matter what the situation is, right? So that's where you get a lot of these extravagant amounts. Sometimes the intentions aren't so noble. Sometimes it's more about just amassing wealth, right? You have a lot of like tribes and families and stuff where they try to keep all the wealth in the family. So they'll be like, no, you can't even marry outside the tribe. You have to marry like your cousins, right? What's the joke for desis, like pupo ki beti or something, right? They try to keep it in the family, right? So that all the wealth stays in it and doesn't go out to somewhere else. So we really do, as a community, we have to realize that, number one, if we are marrying for wealth, then that is already problematic, right? We should not make the mahar something like a price tag, right? It's meant to be a gift, and the Prophet ﷺ used to say that the best or the most blessed marriages, or you find the most blessings in marriages that are simple, or that don't cost a lot, right? So that's where you'll find barakah and you'll find blessings. Because if we're looking for a spouse, right, we look at 4 things, and only one has to do with iman and righteousness, and the other 3 have more to do with social aspects. But which one is placed first? It's not looks, it's not social standing, it's not wealth, right? It's taqwa. You look at their piety, you look at their iman, right? If they're a righteous person, then they will treat you accordingly. They will treat you with respect, and they will, just simply out of the fear of Allah, they will fulfill your rights. Right? If somebody's a God-fearing person, then they will fear Allah for trying, not trying, but to if they violate your rights, that would be something that they would fear Allah for, right? Because when you go into marriage, you have everybody has their rights as husband and wife, and it's up to us to fulfill those rights. Okay, so that's why a lot of the Hanafis, they'll have this mahar Fatimiyya, where they'll say it's like 400 or 480 grams, not grams of silver, 480 dirhams. And so you just convert that into grams. So times that by 3. And so it's very simple. It's very simple. It's not something that should break the bank or a person. You find people. When I would ride around in cabs in Saudi, there would be some young guys, right? And then they'd, small talk. They'd be like, "Oh, hey, are you married? Do you have kids?" Stuff like that. So then I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm married. I have a kid." I would ask him back, "Are you married?" He's like, "No, it's too expensive." Right? So it's like we end up making marriage less and less attainable in that sense, right? So you have to look at the person. If the person truly is like a good person, a righteous person, right? Then we have to we shouldn't prevent that person or choose somebody that doesn't have good manners, or the only thing they have is money. They don't have anything else, right? There's that famous quote: "Some people are so poor that the only thing they have is money," right? Because they don't. What else do they have, right? Do they have proper akhlaq or proper good character, or are they righteous? Are they God-fearing? We have to look at those things more heavily than whether or not they can afford the mahar that we set on them. Then, of course, other examples we get from their marriage is that the Prophet ﷺ would always advise them to be kind to each other, to support one another. They lived a very simple lifestyle, right? They had one bed that the Prophet ﷺ built for them as kind of like a gift to them, and they used it for everything. At nighttime, they use it as a bed. In the daytime, they use it as like a couch, right? They used to feed their animals on that bed, and they used it for everything. And even the Prophet ﷺ, when Ali and Fatima had their own like issues with each other, they would go to the Prophet ﷺ not to complain, but to seek advice, to seek counsel, right? So they knew that, okay, we can't go complaining. Let's see what advice he gives us. And he advised them to just remember Allah and to do lots of dhikr, right? To make sure that, look, like sometimes maybe a person may get tired from doing all the household chores, and just keep doing your dhikr and be patient. And maybe the man may get tired from going out and Ali radiallahu anhu used to earn money by doing labor. So he would also, he wouldn't make too much, but he would be tired as well. And when two tired people are together, they tend to be cranky and whatnot. So it happens. But the Prophet ﷺ would always remind them, be kind to each other and to remember Allah and to do dhikr. Right? So this showed that the Prophet ﷺ emphasized for his daughter and his son-in-law, who was like a son to him because he grew up in his household, that choose contentment over materialism, and to show that, look, if there's mutual support, then your relationship will be strong, right? The support, it has to be mutual. It has to be on both sides, right? And that requires us to focus on helping each other in terms of just daily life, and not focusing so much on worldly things, materialism, wealth, stuff like that. Okay, so the next example, and this is something that even myself, I had not heard too much about, so I had to look into it in a bit more detail. The story of Ali and Fatima, we do hear quite often, but the story of Zainab radiallahu anha and her husband is not as popular or spoken about as much, right? Do y'all even know the name of her husband? No? What?
What was the question?
What was the name of Zainab's husband? Zainab, the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ. No,
So non-Muslim. He's a non-Muslim initially, right?
initially yes. Well, I mean, they were married before revelation came, right? His name was Abu al-As. Abu al-As, right? And so for Zainab, very quickly, we mentioned she was the first daughter. Khadija, radiallahu anha, had essentially raised her to be, very, very caring, to be very, understanding and concerned for her husband's well-being. And she was an extremely patient and positive and caring wife and loving wife for her husband. Abu al-As was related to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam um, through Khadija. Khadija's sister was his mother, right? So Khadija was basically his khala. So this is the Prophet's nephew through Khadija, and he asked for Zainab's hand in marriage, and it's funny because some of the narrations, whether it was for Fatima or Zainab, it mentioned that when the Prophet ﷺ came to both to Zainab and at the time of Fatima's marriage to them, he told them that first to Zainab, Abu al-As is interested in marrying you. He's offered to marry you. And when the Prophet ﷺ told Fatima that Ali wanted to marry her, the narrations say that they both became very shy and they became red in the face. Right? They were like giddy about it. That like, oh, like, so he's come to marry me. Right? So Abu al-As was known to have really good character as well. He was very honest. He was very earnest. He was a good person. And even when we get into the story, you can see that his good character carried over even when there was a huge conflict. Uh, I say conflict, but it was basically the whole reason why there were issues at all within the relationship. So what happened was, by the time um, the Prophet ﷺ received revelation, Abu al-As was off on a trip, right? He was a merchant, so he was traveling for business. By the time he came back, Zainab told her husband that, look, something great has happened. My father has been chosen to be the messenger of Allah. And, because I believe in my father and I believe him to be the best man out there, I have also become a Muslim and I believe in Islam. And she asked Abu al-As, will you not convert as well? And he thought about it. And basically, what happened was he had relatives coming to him and telling him, oh, are you going to dishonor your forefathers? Are you going to leave what they believed in? Are you going to do this, this, and that, right? A lot of the same things that prevented people like Abu Jahl and even Abu Talib from accepting Islam, right? Abu Talib knew in his heart that the Prophet ﷺ was telling the truth and he brought the truth. And yet he still couldn't convert because of this, what they call jahili kibr that they had, this pride and arrogance that they had from their jahiliyyah, right? So Abu al-As, he said that, look, I'm not going to stop you, but I'm not going to convert. So they lived together as a couple where Abu al-As was not a believer and Zainab was a believer, right? And then you had the whole, all the hardship that they went through, and then you had the migration, right? And then she asked her husband again, look, my father's migrating to Medina. I want to go with him. Will you convert, right? And then he said, no, I'm not going to convert. Still had that jahili pride in him, right? Even though he was a good person, he never mistreated Zainab for being a believer, right? They still loved each other. They still honored each other. It was never anything like, oh, you're a believer, this, and that. Like, he didn't mistreat her or anything. He just said, no, I'm just not going to convert. And then, so she remained in Makkah. She still didn't leave. She didn't leave yet. Then the Battle of Badr came, and the mushrikun, they lost. And Abu al-As was taken as a prisoner of war, right? So when they were collecting ransoms to release the prisoners, Zainab, she sent her necklace as ransom. And this necklace was the necklace of Khadija radiallahu anha that she gave to Zainab as a gift for her wedding. So when they were going through all of the ransoms that came in, the Prophet ﷺ recognized the necklace, right? Because this was the necklace of his beloved wife. So he was like, "What's this doing here? You know, why this necklace?" They said, "Oh, Zainab sent this to ransom Abu al-As." So then the Prophet ﷺ asked, he said, "Give me the necklace. I'm going to return it to Zainab." And he asked all of his companions, he said, "Are you all okay with releasing Abu al-As and returning him to his wife with the necklace?" And they all agreed. They had no reason to say that, "No, don't do this, don't do that. Keep the necklace, keep that." No. So then they sent back the necklace, and the Prophet ﷺ said that, "Look, don't do this again. Don't use the necklace." And basically, the commandment came down that a believing woman could not stay married to a non-believing man. So Zainab then told her husband again, "I have been commanded essentially to leave because you're not a believer. I'm going to Medina. Will you convert and come with me?" Again, he still said no. Right? So she went to Medina. She migrated. She took her children with her. They had a daughter and a son, Umama and Ali. And Abu al-As still hadn't converted. And for 6 years, Zainab stayed in Medina as a single woman. She did not want to marry anyone else, although she had a ton of proposals coming in.
She was divorced from him. Or
Essentially, yes,
right.
because he wasn't a believer.
Mm.
Right? The only way for their marriage to become valid again is for him to convert. So she's essentially she could marry someone else at this point, but she chose not to for 6 years. Finally, Abu al-As was traveling, and their caravan. And remember, keep in mind that the Muslims, they used to intercept caravans from the Quraysh in order to reclaim the wealth that was taken from them. Right? Sometimes people they'll read up on this in the seerah, and they'll be like, "This sounds like highway robbery. What are they doing?" They weren't just jumping caravans just to steal from them. The mushrikun, the people, the Quraysh of Makkah, they forcibly took the wealth that didn't belong to them from the Muslims, and they kept it for themselves, and they even used it to arm themselves to fight against the Muslims, right? So this was just the Muslims trying to reclaim the wealth that already belonged to them. So Abu al-As was part of one of these caravans. So they took him as prisoner again. So Abu al-As, he ran away from the Muslims, and he went straight to the door of Zainab. This was right before Fajr time, right? So she's like, "Okay, you can hide out here, and I'll talk to the Messenger of Allah after the Salah." Right? So they pray Fajr, and afterwards she goes to the Prophet ﷺ. She tells him what happened. So then the Prophet again says that Zainab says that, "I want to release Abu al-As. I want to set him free." So then the Prophet ﷺ told his companions and the people around, "Did you hear what she said?" And they said, "Yes." He's like, "Do you agree to releasing Abu al-As?" And they said, "Yes." So then the Prophet ﷺ said that, "Look, he is not your spouse anymore. So you have to be careful around him." So then she told Abu al-As that, "Look, please just convert." And he said no again. And the Prophet ﷺ gave Abu al-As, they agreed that, okay, whatever he had with him that he took for trade, he would take it back and he could go back to Makkah. Right? So when he went back to Makkah, he gave everyone their stuff back. And then he said, "I bear witness that there's none worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is his messenger." And then he went back to Medina, and finally he converted, and him and Zainab were husband and wife again. But then, sadly, Zainab radiallahu anha, she passed away the next year. Right? So 6 years of the separation and longing for her husband. And as I mentioned, like he still loved her as well. He just couldn't give up that that pride he had, that pressure that he had from his tribe and his family and whatnot. But then finally, he was able to do it because he saw the love he received from his wife, and from the Prophet ﷺ and from the Muslims. So when he came back and lived with her for that 1 year, when she passed away, it was so hard on him that basically he would cry profusely. He would cry so much, and the Prophet ﷺ would try to comfort him, but then the Prophet ﷺ would start crying as well, and it became too much for him to bear. And then in the following year, Abu al-As passed away as well, right? And it's funny. My wife tells me this all the time. She's like, there's a study that when the husband passes away first, the wife can kind of live on for a little bit longer. But when it's the other way around, when the wife passes away first, the husband tends to follow soon after. So she's like, look, just I'll die first and you'll join me later anyways, right? I was like, no, I don't want to live for even if it's a day, like you don't want to live with that anguish. And you see that with Abu al-As, that he really loved his wife, and he was so heartbroken that finally he finally agreed to become a Muslim and live and be reunited with his family, right? So there's a lot we learn from that as well. We have to keep relying upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Zainab didn't marry anyone else. She had hope that her husband, he was a good man. He had a lot of those same honest traits that the Prophet ﷺ had, right? He was very trustworthy. He was very honest. He never lied, right? So he was never dishonest about anything, about his own belief and about Zainab becoming a Muslim and believing. So he was very straightforward and honest, and he never you hear examples of maybe there's different even with the companions, maybe one of them converted and the other didn't. Or you might hear stories within families where like a spouse might convert and the other won't, or a child converts and the family's not happy and they start emotionally abusing the person who decides to convert, right? I've heard stories from other imams where I believe it was Imam Suhbah. He said that there was this one girl from a very conservative Christian family, and she would ask him, like, can I hide in the bathroom and break my fast or pray and stuff like that, because basically it was like if her family found out, they may even harm her, right? It's to that extent. And so I've had personal experiences too where people have come up to me and said that I haven't told my parents yet. If they found out, they'd be really upset. I don't know how they take it. But Abu al-As was not like that. He supported her in her beliefs, but he just himself could not do it until much later, right? Um, so again, whenever in any relationship, any marriage, you'll have your fair share of tests and trials, right? Whether together or with each other. And you just have to remain patient and just remember that whatever it is, you have to recognize that at that point in time, if the other person is truly a good person, truly a pious, righteous person, they're a person of taqwa, a person of iman, then you just have to you have to weather the storm, right? You have to ride the waves and see it through, right? Otherwise, we're going to be tested in so many different ways, right? Health, wealth, family, we're tested with all of this, right? So why not have somebody with you that you can go through these trials with, right? It's better than doing it alone. So we have to face our difficulties together. We have to trust in Allah's plan. And then before I get to the next one, there's one instance I want to mention, and it was narrated about Umar radiallahu anh. This is a famous narration that a man came to Umar radiallahu anh, and he was going to complain to him that his wife is nagging him too much, right? So then he gets to the door of Umar, and he hears Umar's wife complaining to him, right? So Umar's the Khalifa at this time. He's Amir al-Mu'mineen, right? The leader of the believers. And even in his household, his wife is sitting there complaining to him. So then the man, when he heard this, he was confused. He was like, I thought I was going to come to Umar and he would tell my wife, like stop nagging him or whatever, right? So then he asked him, he's like, what happened? What's going on? So then Umar, he very wisely said that speaking about his wife, she takes care of my home, she raises my children, and she bears hardships for me. Should I not bear her words? Right? So it's like there's always that saying that we're given 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we speak, right? And when it comes to here's a tip in my 15 years of marriage, right? I'm no expert again, but sometimes the just women in general, they just want to be heard. Right? It's not so much that they're necessary. They might be nagging you. It might be about you, but it's not so much that, hey, I'm telling you this because you're a bum and you need to change yourself. It's just that I'm a little stressed out and I just need somebody to talk to. It's better to talk to you than to anybody else, right? Because honestly, I think the one biggest success that I can point to within my marriage after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that everything stays between us, right? I don't go to my friends and complain. She doesn't go to her friends and complain, right? A perfect marriage, there's no such thing. There's going to be, again, you're living with someone, you're responsible for each other. There's going to be times of tension, maybe even turmoil, stress, right? Whatever have you. But it's always best to talk to each other about it, right? So sometimes you just have to listen. And I know men, right? Our initial response is to get into solution mode, but sometimes women don't care about our solutions. They just want us to hear them out, and they want to feel heard and acknowledged. And then maybe later, they may or may not want to take your solution, or maybe they're just hungry. Who knows? But the next example we have, which when I first heard this story, I had pictured it in my head, and it was really heartbreaking because this was the story of Salama and Abu Salama, right? Salama later became the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. But before her husband passed away, Abu Salama, she was married to Abu Salama, and they had a child, Salama. These were some of the early Muslims. They migrated to Abyssinia, right? So they first migrated to Ethiopia, Abyssinia. Then they came back to Mecca, and then they were migrating again to Medina. So they were from the few people that migrated twice for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they truly have a special place amongst the Muslims. When they were leaving from Medina, Abu Salama was going to walk, and Salama and their child Salama were going to sit on the camel, and they would head out to Medina. Salama's tribe saw them, so they ran up on them. They grabbed the camel and they said, "No way are you taking our sister with you." So they took her, and Abu Salama couldn't do anything about it, and he had to go and leave by himself. And then Abu Salama's tribe saw Salama's tribe taking her away with Salama, the child. So they went to Salama's tribe and they said, "No way are we letting you take one of our sons." So they took Salama away. So now you have a family of 3 divided 3 ways. Abu Salama is off to Medina. Salama is being held captive by her family. When I say captive, it doesn't mean like they tied her up and imprisoned her, but they wouldn't allow her to leave. And Salama, little baby boy, is with his father's tribe because they didn't want Salama's tribe to take one of their sons. When this happened, they were heartbroken. The separation was too much for them to bear. Salama, there's some narrations that she used to go out to the edge of Mecca every single day, and she would just cry. She would just go out to the edge of Mecca and just cry and cry and cry. Right. So that image really broke my heart when I first heard the story. Right.
Why would she go to the edge? Because would she cry so much that it becomes like makruh or something?
No, it was more because like she would go towards the direction of Medina and she would go to the edge of Makkah because she wanted to be reunited with her family. Like she did not want, like she wanted to be with her husband, she wanted to be with the other Muslims, she wanted to be close to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So this caused her a lot of grief, and she would go out and cry every single day. And then, finally, um a lot of the people were like, just take some pity on her. Poor girl. She's separated from her son, separated from her husband. Just let them just go and be a family again. So then they finally agreed. They're like, okay, fine, we'll let them be together. So Salama took her son. She got on a camel, or I don't know if it was a camel, but she got on a ride, and she was about to go by herself. And then she came upon um, a man. At the time, he wasn't a Muslim. He became Muslim later, but his name was Uthman ibn Talha. So non-Muslim, from the Quraysh, very from a very noble tribe of the Quraysh. I believe his tribe were the ones that were in charge of the keys of the Kaaba. So he saw her traveling by herself, and he said that, this isn't right. A woman with her child traveling by herself. So he went up to her and he said, let me accompany you. Let me make sure you get there safely. So he walked. She was on the camel, brought her all the way to her destination, to where the Muslims were camped in Medina. And after that, Salama, she would praise Uthman ibn Talha a lot. She would say, I've never met a man more honest and honorable than Uthman ibn Talha, right? Because he had no reason to help her at all, right? But he still did so out of the goodness of his heart. And of course, later he became a companion, and his tribe was honored to this day to be from those that hold on to the keys of the Kaaba. So when she came back, they were reunited, and Abu Salama, Salama loved him so much, right? They both loved each other a lot, and she thought that there was no better man than him, because even there was a time when they made a vow to each other after they learned that people who love one another will be reunited in Jannah, right? So in Jannah we'll be reunited with our loved ones. They essentially made this vow that we're not, if one of us dies, we're not going to marry anybody else, right? This happens sometimes with couples, right? Me and my wife have had this discussion too. Right? So, but then Abu Salama was like, no, I don't want you to go through that. If I die, then you go marry someone else and you find somebody better than me. And Salama, this whole time, from the time she heard this, she thought, who is better than Abu Salama? Who could possibly be better than him? And then, sadly, Abu Salama was martyred in the Battle of Uhud. So when Salama got this news, of course, heartbroken, distraught, continuously making dua. Oh Allah, ease my pain, take this away from me, replace it with better, right? The pain of losing Abu Salama, please replace it with something better. And she kept making this dua over and over and over again. And other companions were like, you know, proposing to her, I'll be your husband, because it was a noble and honorable thing to take care of orphans and to take care of widows, right? And widows with children especially, that you would marry them, take care of them in a society where they were the weakest of people. Nobody was really looking out for the orphans. Nobody was looking out for the widows. They would essentially be on their own, right? So it was a very noble act to take care of them, especially if you were to marry them and take care of them and treat them justly. But Salama, she just couldn't get herself to accept anybody's proposal. She was thinking the whole time, who's better than Abu Salama? Who's better than Abu Salama? And finally, the Prophet ﷺ proposed, right? You can't say that Abu Salama is better than the Prophet ﷺ, right? So she didn't say no to his proposal, and she accepted his proposal and became his wife. So from that, and we'll conclude there. We see that as long as we keep Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala centered within our relationships, and we make our main focus piety, taqwa, being conscious, being aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, only then will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the things that He promised us when it comes to marriage. right? I wanted to mention this at the beginning, but I'll mention it now. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, what's the famous verse that we usually hear at weddings or people recite when it comes to marriage? It's in Surah Al-Rum.
We created you in parents.
No, that's in Surah An-Naba. وَخَلَقْنَاكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا. No, what's the famous verse that people usually recite? Surah Al-Rum.
The believing men are for the believing women, something along those lines.
That's not it either.
The one about the coolness of the eyes.
Kind of. They don't use the word coolness of eyes. That's a dua. Okay, I guess maybe you guys don't hear it that much then. It goes, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. Right? At least this is what I usually hear at weddings. So what does the verse mean? And from his signs is that he created you, or created for you, your spouses, right? وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, from his signs, أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُمْ, that he created for you all, مِنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ, from yourselves, because Hawa was created from the rib of Adam alayhi salam, أَزْوَاجًا, right? Your spouses. Why? لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, right? That literally means what? So that you can live with them. But the people can extract other meanings from that, because just to live with them, the word that means, to live with someone, sakana yaskunu, what other word do you get from that? What word do you hear when you hear sakana, sin kaf nun, sukun, sakina? What does that mean?
Peace.
What's a better way to
Tranquility.
tranquility, right? So you live with your spouses, and what do you get living with them? Peace and tranquility, right? Not like that one meme where it goes, I don't want peace, only problems, right? No. Peace and tranquility. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will place what? Mawadda and rahmah.
Like union and stuff.
Rahmah is mercy, but what is mawadda?
Well, compassion. Compassion? It's not?
Close. People say love. They translate it as love, but is that
Longing?
accurate?
Is it longing? But
What does it mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-wadud?
The most loving.
Most loving. But what's another word?
Giving.
Not giving. Okay.
We're bad students.
No, it's okay.
Comforting.
Affection. That's why compassion was close. But it's affection, right? Because you could say love, but what does that mean? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places love between you, that you get all googly-eyed when you look at each other, right? No, affection is more accurate, because when you're affectionate towards someone else, that entails some actual, some actions involved in there, right? That you're showing love to the other person, that you're showing affection. And part of affection is showing kindness and showing care and showing mercy, right? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places that affection, right, that will eventually lead to there being mercy between husband and wife. And when you have that affection and that mercy, then that's where you get the tranquility from, living with one another. Inna fi dhalika la'ayatin liqawmin yatafakkarun. So verily in that are signs for those who reflect. So that's why it's important that we center Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our relationships. We truly strive for taqwa, for piety and righteousness. And that's where you get the dua. Why am I forgetting the dua? رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ. Right? Oh Allah, give me from our spouses and our offspring coolness of our eyes. Right? Coolness of our eyes. You get that from honoring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first. Right? And as I mentioned in the beginning, and you may hear me say this like every single time I talk about marriage or if I'm performing a nikah, that if your relationship is centered upon taqwa, then at the very least, a person or a couple in a relationship or a marriage centered around taqwa will not have their rights violated, right? Because either spouse will fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for violating the other's rights. And what more could you ask for? Right? Especially, let's say, I don't know, I'm not even sure what percentage of marriages nowadays are love marriages, right? But even if it's not a love marriage, let's say that you're completely okay marrying the first decent person that comes around that meets your criteria, right? Where does the love and affection come from? It's not like you're just gonna say I do or Kabul and it just pops up like that, right? It takes time. It takes getting to know one another. It takes and if they're treating each other with kindness and mercy and compassion and affection, and they're fulfilling each other's rights, right? That will go a long way in building that true love that we found or we find with the companions and we find with the Prophet ﷺ and his family, his wives, his children, his closest companions, right? We see the type of love that they had, where a brother-in-law or a son-in-law will help out the man trying to marry his sister-in-law, right? Where an entire city will come together and celebrate the marriage of two beloved people to the Prophet ﷺ, right? The marriage of Ali and Fatima, it was like the talk of the town. Everybody was excited for it, even though it was so simple, right? What did they eat? They had barley and they had dates and they had hais, right? Does anybody know what hais is? It's this dessert in Saudi Arabia where it's like mashed up dates, right? It's kind of like date halwa, right? It tastes amazing. So if you guys ever go to Saudi, try some. It'll change your life, right? Put some honey, some cream cheese. But yeah, that's all they had. It was so simple. Yet you had companions saying that it was the most enjoyable wedding that they could remember, right? It's not like that was the only wedding around, but everybody, the simplicity of it, the honor, the blessings, the barakah of having these two great people marrying one another and loving each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It all had to do with their position as Muslims, right? Their iman, their taqwa, right? It's not just because they were the family of the Prophet ﷺ, right? But it was through that closeness to the Prophet ﷺ that elevated them in their spiritual ranks, right? It wasn't some type of nepotism that's like, oh, you're my cousin and I raised you and you're my most beloved daughter, you're going to be the best. No, it was because they were close to the Prophet ﷺ that they followed his example and they learned from him personally up close, right? And they would copy him and they would try to be like him, right? Because the Prophet ﷺ, it was funny, I don't want to take much longer. I know there's Q&A and whatnot and other activities, but there's a joke that Fatima, she was joking with the Prophet ﷺ, and she said, because Ali radiallahu anh, anybody know his physical description? When you think of Ali radiallahu anh, what's the first thought in your head of what he might be like physically?
I heard he was short.
He was short. Did any of y'all assume that he would be short?
No.
He was short. He was short. He had huge biceps, but he also had a big belly. Yeah, he had a big belly, and this is just his physical description. And even as he got older, he was bald from the middle, right? So he had kind of like the baldness thing going on in the middle. But still nobody could mess with him. He was a fierce warrior. He was a fierce fighter. They said his biceps were so big you couldn't even wrap two hands around it, right? So he was very strong, very powerful. And as I mentioned, he made his living doing labor, right? In one of the battles, after the death of Uthman, so this is one of the fitna battles, Ali went onto the battlefield while the generals on the other side were just sitting back, and people were like, you guys are the generals, why don't you go fight Ali? And as they said that, Ali picked a man up with one hand and slammed him to the ground. And they said, you want us to go up against that? Right? So Fatima was joking. She said, are you getting me married to the one known with the big belly? Right? She was joking. They both, Fatima and Ali were both interested in each other anyways. Right? And the Prophet said, yes, but you know, he was the first to believe because he was one of the very first to accept Islam. They say it was Khadija and then Ali and then Abu Bakr, right? Because Ali was living with the Prophet at the time, so he was the first boy to accept Islam. He was a boy at the time, and he said he was the first to believe, and no companion has more knowledge than him, and no other companion has more hilm than him. And hilm is like when you have forbearance, like you're patient in dealing with others, right? So he used that opportunity to praise Ali radiallahu anhu, right? So these are the types of people, the types of characteristics they had, and you see that it translated in them dealing with their families and their spouses, and that's where we get these legendary love stories from. So with that, I'll conclude, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala place love and mercy and compassion and affection between all spouses, to allow husbands and wives to be righteous and pious and push each other towards righteousness and piety, to push each other towards those things that will increase them in taqwa, to be the coolness of each other's eyes. And for those that are not married and looking to get married, don't worry, I won't pick on you, Asher. I know everybody does. But for those of you looking to get married, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you with righteous and pious spouses that are not only the most righteous and pious, but you're actually attracted to. And because some people think that there's a trade-off somewhere, but there doesn't have to be a trade-off. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept all the good that we do and to make it a means of goodness for us in this life and the hereafter. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for our shortcomings and our sins, and to continue to send the best of peace and blessings upon his beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions and his family and those who follow until the last day. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. How much time are we giving for Q&A?
Oh, well, actually, so if you guys have any questions that you want to ask, you can ask out loud, or if you send them here, they will be anonymous. So feel free, you can have 10, 15, yeah. Any questions you guys have? Feel free.
Public or anonymous?
And third, we can read them out too, if there's any anonymous.
No questions?
So any questions that anyone wants to ask in person, or should we just go to the anonymous ones? Okay, we'll go to the anonymous ones.
There aren't any.
There aren't any.
Oh, there is it? Wow.
I'm hoping no questions is a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I gave out enough information for you guys to not have any questions.
Okay, going once, going twice, 3. Okay. Okay, so we also have the last part of the event, which is like game night or activity night, inshallah. So whoever wants to stay, raise your hand if you're staying for that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so I have a fun game. We're gonna do it. It's gonna be boys versus girls. It's gonna be awesome. Okay, I want to see who wins. You know, because it's gonna be about communication. Who communicates better, guys with each other or girls with each other?
Interesting.
Okay. Stay tuned.
Let me know who wins.
Let me go into my argument.
Chef, please the judge.
Let me know who wins.